what I'm wanting to encourage us in today is, where is your confidence, and what are you living for, and whose approval are you living for? Whose recognition are you living for? What's up, everybody? I'm Emma, and I am so glad that you are here on my YouTube channel. I love you so much. You are so beautiful, fearfully and wonderfully made. You were made on purpose because you were made by a purposeful God who has such just incredible love for you. So much love for you that he would send his one and only son, Jesus, to live and die and rise again from the grave so that in him you could have a forever relationship with God, so that you could be made right in his eyes, so that you could have eternal life. This love is unstoppable. This love is over all things. This love is undefeated, and it's the love that God has for us. And I hope that encourages you so much. I'm really excited because we are going to be in Exodus chapter 1 today. And to give a little context, we're going to be really hanging out just in one verse, which I think is really fun. And also, I hope that encourages you all, because I think sometimes it can be really easy to just go. Get in this extremely fast-paced, check off every box that you possibly can, make sure that you get to point C before you've even thought about point A. We're just constantly on the go, and it's almost like a reward if you're busy. And I hope that this encourages you, that we're just sitting in one verse today. Now, it's awesome to go and read 20 chapters. It's awesome to go and read through 15 verses. Those things are incredible. But I want to encourage us to not get in the habit of, I'm better, or I'm more accomplished, or I've gotten more things done whenever I've read more. Sometimes it's just as beneficial. Sometimes it's even more beneficial if you just slow down and let's just sit in this one verse for a little bit. How much is in it? Really ask questions to the Lord as you read the text. Really observe it. Learn from it. What does this mean? What can I learn from this? How can I apply the truth in this to my life? This one verse. And so I want to really just slow down with you guys today and learn from the Lord's heart through one verse. But to give context to that one verse, which is going to be Exodus chapter 1, verse 8, the 7 verses leading up to it really kind of give us the layout of, okay, these are the sons of Israel, or Jacob, as he was renamed Israel. These are his sons. We've just finished the book of Genesis, and at the end of Genesis, we read about how the Israelites were cared for, and Joseph was high in command, and Jacob was buried. And so we read a lot about what's been happening in the lives of these people. But now, in the start of Exodus, we discover that those generations have died off. So just to read it with you guys so that we have some context leading up to verse 8, it says, "These are the names of the sons of Israel," or his name had previously been Jacob, "who came to Egypt with Jacob, each with his own household. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan and Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. All the descendants of Jacob were 70 persons. Joseph was already in Egypt. Then Joseph died, and all his brothers, and all that generation." So a lot of time has passed as this generation has died off. But then verse 7, we read that the people of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly. They multiplied, they grew exceedingly strong. The land that they were in was filled. So what's really cool here is something important to know is that Pharaoh, he basically is the king of Egypt. He and Joseph were in very tight relationship. And because of that, because Joseph had such favor and honor in the eyes of Pharaoh, and the Israelites were Joseph's people, the Pharaoh honored the Israelites. The Israelites were taken care of. And here we see that they're multiplying, that they're growing exceedingly strong, that their land is full. And now we're being updated a little bit in the start of Exodus, and we know that the generation of Joseph, so therefore also the Pharaoh that he was tight with, it's died off. And now we have a new dynasty coming in. We have a new king that stepped in, and that is where we pick up in verse 8. Verse 8 says, "Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph." Now that doesn't seem like much of a verse to sit in over a whole video, but when I was reading this in my own time, I just stopped in my tracks. And if you read in the NLT version, it says, "Eventually, a new king came to power in Egypt who knew nothing about Joseph or what he had done." I want you, if you're writing notes, I want you to write down the word eventually. Eventually, a new king came to power, and this new king of Egypt, he had not experienced Joseph. He didn't know who he was. He didn't know what he did. And because of that, he had no respect for him. And as if you were to continue to read throughout Exodus, you can see that that's really set up Israel to be put under oppression and to be held as slaves by the Egyptians. And then it leads into Moses, and God calls Moses to lead the people of Israel out of the bondage in Egypt. So it's so cool to see God's sovereignty in it all. But this is where we see, okay, this is why there was a new king that came in, didn't know Joseph, didn't have respect for him, therefore did not care, and actually was intimidated by the exceedingly strengthened and multiplying crew of the Israelites, and he wanted them out. He wanted them in bondage. He did not want them to overpower him. And so when I read that, and all of that I say just to give context to kind of what's going on, because that's so important, but I love this word eventually. A new king came to power in Egypt, and he did not know Joseph. And why is this so, why does this stand out? Why is this so impactful for me to read? Because if you go back and read through Genesis, you will see that Joseph, he very much was a known person. So it is kind of odd that this king he had not experienced Joseph. He didn't know who Joseph was. He didn't even know what Joseph did. And that's a pretty bold statement because Joseph was very well known. And Joseph did quite a lot. As I said, him and Pharaoh were tight. He was second in command to Pharaoh. Joseph, he had leadership authority over all of Egypt, and the only person that was above him was Pharaoh. He was second in command, and there were 7 years of famine and 7 years of harvest. And during those 7 years of famine and harvest, God used Joseph to lead the people, to steward their resources well. People traveled from all over to come to Joseph to be cared for. Joseph was honored. He was established. He was very much respected. And so that's why I say this is a big deal that this new king, this new dynasty did not know Joseph, did not care for Joseph, and didn't even know what he had done. And that's a big deal because he did a lot. And I think what's so crazy though is that even though yes, Joseph did all of those things and they were amazing and they were by the strength of the Lord and they were by the will of the Lord, still that generation passed and eventually a new king came to power. And what I think was really important though is that even though the new king didn't know any of those things that Joseph did, didn't know anything about who Joseph was, even though he was very well known, even though he was a man of great influence. We talk tons in our culture today about influence, being influential, being an influencer. Joseph was that. He definitely lived an influential life in a beautiful, positive way. But he wasn't known eventually. He wasn't remembered eventually. The king didn't know what he did eventually. But what I think is really cool is that doesn't take away what he did. That doesn't take away the significance of the life that he lived. That doesn't take away the significance of who he was. Even though it wasn't remembered by the new king, even though it wasn't known by the new king, even though it wasn't respected by the new king, it still was significant. It still was influential. It still was God. It was still being used by God and purposed by God. And the reason you may be like, Emma, okay, where are you getting at? The reason that I think this is so powerful and important for us to lean in on is because the reality is that the recognition of people are going to fade. The applause, the approval, the likes, the kind comments that people have from time to time, they're going to come and they're going to leave. The applause, the praise, the affirmation, the kind comments, the likes, the follows, it's eventually not going to be here anymore because people are like grass. It sounds kind of crazy to say that, but in 1 Peter 1:24-25, we read that the people, we are like grass. From dust we came, to dust we will return. The grass withers and the flowers fade, but, this is what I'm getting at, the word of God, it stands forever. And so what I'm wanting to encourage us in today is, where is your confidence? And what are you living for? And whose approval are you living for? Whose recognition are you living for? Because get this, if Joseph's confidence and security and joy was rooted in people recognizing what he did, in people acknowledging who he was, in people remembering what he did, then eventually his confidence and his joy and his security was going to fade, because eventually a new king came into place who didn't even remember him. Eventually that generation died off. Eventually a new trend is going to come. Eventually a new social media platform is going to arise. Eventually a new, do you see what I'm getting at? Where our treasure is, there our heart will also be. And if my treasure is whether or not people recognize me, then that's where my heart is totally invested. Then that's where I'm finding my worth. That's where I'm finding my confidence. That's where I'm finding my reward. Well, then eventually I am going to be let down, because the recognition and the approval of people, it's going to come and it's going to go. But Jesus, he said, store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where thieves cannot break in and steal, moths cannot destroy. If my confidence is in how often people leave a nice comment, how many times people like my post, how many know my name and all the accomplishments that I've achieved, my confidence is quickly going to turn into insecurity, because it's being placed in something that isn't long lasting and it isn't eternal. So instead, this is my encouragement to us today. You remember that word eventually that you wrote down? There is no eventually with God. He will not eventually be replaced on the throne. He will not eventually forget who you are. He will not eventually stop loving you if you mess up. He's unchanging. His word never fades. His word never withers. Listen to this. Instead of putting our confidence in what people have to say and what people remember about us, instead of living for the recognition of people, let's choose to put our confidence in the Lord today. Let's seek his approval. Let's aim for an eternal reward. Let's pursue to please the commanding officer that enlisted us. That's from 2 Timothy 2. It's one of my favorites. We are servants of Christ because, like I said, there's no eventually with God. I'm going to say it again. He won't eventually be replaced on the throne. He won't eventually stop loving you. He won't eventually lose power. He won't eventually forget his promises to you. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. He knows who you are. He knows what you've done. And if you've lived for him, then your reward and your recognition exceeds way beyond any recognition or pat on the back that you could get in the here and now from people. Be encouraged, friends, that yes, what you do here matters. And yes, people's pats on the backs and kind words are encouraging and affirming, and they are motivating. It's such a beautiful thing how we can encourage each other. That sound you just heard, if you heard it, was my puppy. But friend, I love how Jesus even is talking to the religious leaders, and he's addressing the fact that they would go and pray in the streets and so that everybody could hear them. They would fast in such a way that people knew that they were fasting. People knew they were hungry. People knew that they were like doing the quote unquote right religious thing. They made sure that the public knew what they were doing. They made sure the public knew who they were, what their status was, where they were at in leadership, all the boxes that they were checking off. They wanted to make sure that people knew they were giving, that they knew that they were fasting, that they knew they were praying. And Jesus is like, yo, if you're looking for the reward of people giving you a pat on the back, then congratulations, that's the reward you're going to get. But I challenge you to go pray to your Father who's in secret. Go to your room and shut the door. I challenge you that when you fast, wash your face, put on clean clothes, have composure, not trying to draw attention to yourself because you're living for the recognition of people and totally missing the point of serving the God that you claim you're doing that for. And he says, the Father who sees in secret will reward you. Whose recognition are you seeking? If people flock to you and encourage you and applaud you, praise God, how encouraging. But if they stop, that doesn't mean that I stop living the way that I'm living. If they stop, that doesn't mean I automatically become insecure, because that was never where my confidence was placed anyway. Because yes, eventually opinions of people will fluctuate, but my God will never eventually change his promises. My God will never eventually stop loving me. My God will never eventually remove the hope that I have of eternity. And it's him. It's eternity with him. It's his promises. It's his heart. It's who he is and who he's called me to be. It's his mission. That is what I'm living for. And because that is unchanging, my confidence never has to change. It can only grow because I continue to grow more aware of truly how solid God is, and therefore truly how solid I can stand. Even when eventually culture changes, trends change, applause change, opinions change, likes come and unfollows happen. Be encouraged and ask yourself today, whose recognition am I living for? It's something I have to ask myself all the time. Constant heart check. God, give me a pure heart that I may see you, because I want to see you clearly and keep my eyes on you. Help me to remove the things that so easily hinder, the sin that so easily entangles, so that I can run the race that's been set before me with endurance, with my eyes fixed on Jesus, who for the joy that was set before him, he knew the eternal reward. The joy that was set before him, he endured the cross, despising its shame, and is now seated at the right hand of the Father. That is what I'm living for. The recognition of God telling me, this is so powerful. Well done, my good and faithful servant. That is the recognition that we ought to live for. I love y'all so much, and I hope that y'all have the best day ever and that you know how incredibly loved you are. I love you guys.